When you think Funko, a lot of people are thinking about Funko Land, the chain of video game retail stores that popped up during the middle and especially late 1990s. It is a chain of stores that I had the privilege of working for more than 2 years as an assistant manager and as a store manager. While I got burned out kind of early because it was my first retail job, I do not regret the time that I spent working for the chain. Between the time I spent laboring and lobbying for and campaigning for the opportunity to work for the company, all the way through the time that I left, which was kind of a difficult decision. It is a company and a chain of stores that I still miss to this very day. I think that the entire landscape of video game sales suffered when Funko Land went away. But before there was Funko Land, there was Funko Inc., which was primarily a mail order method of video game trading in and buying of used games. What you would do is you would look at Funko's ad listing in video game magazines. You used to see them in EGM, GamePro, Game Players magazine. It used to be just price lists. That's all it was. And what you would do is you would figure out what games you wanted to trade in. You would package them up. You would send them back to Funko. They would process them, and you would get store credit equivalent to what you traded in. And then you could use that store credit to order things from Funko's warehouse and get them sent to you. If you didn't have a video game store in your backyard, this was useful, where you could manage this all through mail order. While it certainly took a fair amount of time, it was great for kids, really. Kids and maybe younger teenagers. Once you get to be a little bit older where you could drive, perhaps you could find video game stores that are a bit closer to you so you could get more immediate results. I was pretty fortunate in the 1990s where I had a pair of solid video game stores close by me in Fantasy Realms and Video Game Castle. So I really didn't do the mail order thing, but I certainly remember reading Funko's advertising and price lists in a lot of video game magazines during the 1990s. One of the things that Funko Incorporated created that is still in existence today is the creation of Game Informer magazine. Right here, I have the January-February 1992 issue of Game Informer, which was donated to me by my friend Benny, who also set me up with the Next Generation issue number 1 that I opened for Print from the Past a little while ago. So thanks to Benny for setting me up with this. While I don't have the ability to take the plastic wrap off this because there just isn't one, I thought it would be fun to dig into this magazine a little bit and see what early Game Informer looked like. So that's what we're going to do in this episode of Print from the Past. As you see here on the front cover, we do have Lemmings, we have Faceball 2000 for the Game Boy, we have Winter Challenge, I believe that's for the Genesis. We have a little bit of talk here, or a tease for the Consumer Electronics Show from 1992. For those that don't remember, E3 wasn't always a thing. So before E3 was a thing, the video game industry would show off their wares at CES, or the Consumer Electronics Show, every year. And this was obviously before E3, so they're talking about CES in this magazine. They're also talking, or they're debuting their Tech Talk column, and we'll take a look at that. Also, game reviews for Faceball, Shatterhand, and RPM Racing are included. When we open up the magazine, we do have an ad here for Rolling Thunder 2, which is the sequel to the arcade game. It was a console-only sequel, just like Splatterhouse 2 was a console-only sequel for Splatterhouse. We also have a page of letters to the editor. They call these Dear Game Informer. Most of these are just compliments for the magazine. First off, I'd like to say your magazine is great. I really enjoy the reviews because they're opinions from different people instead of the same person every time. Your magazine should be bigger. That would happen later. Otherwise, it's great. Don't change it. Or, your magazine is great. I love the tips for all the video game systems. Your tips work better than GamePro's. Psst, a burn on GamePro there. I mean it until Ed, Marianne, Rick, and Andy to keep up the good work. That Andy that they're talking about, by the way, is Andy McNamara. Yes, the same Andy McNamara that worked as the executive editor for Game Informer for quite some time. He just recently left the magazine after a long run of, I believe, 30 years plus. I'm not sure what Andy is doing now, but if you think about it, being with the same magazine for more than 3 decades is outstanding. Game Informer is one of the few magazines that has stood the test of time after online kind of changed everything and really set the magazine era kind of like the dinosaurs and had those mostly dying out. So kudos to Andy for a heck of a run with Game Informer magazine. The other thing I want to mention is kind of a prescient email or letter to the editor. Listen to this one. I was reading in the December 91 issue of Game Informer that one girl suggested Fun Club membership cards. I think that this is a good idea. I bought games from your company and they're great. Please inform me if Funko decides to make membership cards. I would like to have one. I think that the Game Informer is a great magazine for people who love video games. As it turns out, while that didn't happen with Funko Land, it would happen with GameStop when that company came into being, where there would be a membership card, which eventually became the Power Up Rewards card. And Game Crazy, which was a competitor to Funko Land, would follow suit with a VIP card. So this letter wasn't too far off. They were just a little bit in advance in terms of suggesting the membership card. As we look further into the magazine, we do have an index here. We have an ad for Faceball 2000 for the Game Boy. You can see it right there. And some of the games that we're going to be talking about here include Madden 92, Joe Montana 2, Shatterhand, RPM Racing, Wonder Boy and Monster World, Asteroids, and more. So it's pretty cool to be looking at that. The Game Informer magazine at this point was published bi-monthly, much like Nintendo Power was when it first started to be a thing. So you were getting 6 issues a year instead of 12. Something to keep in mind there. Looking further into the magazine, we have some information about GameTech's InfoGenius system, which I kind of remember for the Game Boy, where it had a French translator, Spanish translator, spell checker, personal organizer, and travel guide. We also have a list of the different reviews in the magazine, and you can see with the hair there, you can see Andy's picture. Oh boy, we all had hair that we weren't so proud of in the 90s, I can tell you that much right now. So that's kind of a look at that. I don't want to give any too many spoilers on the reviews until we get there. So Lemmings is the first game that is shared. It looks like this is the Super Nintendo version of Lemmings. Now, what's interesting about Game Informer's review format at this point is they have the game reviewed by 3 different people, as well as having a full game review written. So you have the game review, and then you have each reviewer's own viewpoint on the game. Now, Lemmings is not my thing, if I'm being completely honest. I never liked Lemmings from the get-go. I remember when it came out for the Super Nintendo, I didn't play it on PC. And being the puzzle game that it was, I had absolutely no interest in it and passed it over. I still don't own it to this day, and if I'm being honest, I think I've played it for maybe 15 minutes total in my life. But when I look at the reviews here, the reviews are pretty strong. Ed gives it a 9 in concept, a 9 in graphics and animation, a 7 in sound, a 9 in playability, and a full 10 in entertainment value. Marianne, the game master, gives it solid 10s across the board, not a single 9, it's all 10s. And Andy McNamara gave it a 9 in concept, a 7 in graphics, an 8 in sound, a 7 in playability, and an 8 in entertainment value. So an 8 3/4, a 10, and an 8. Interestingly enough, that is the same value, like they do like the 8 and they do the quarter by quarters, so you can do like 9, 9.25, 9.5, 9.75. I believe that they still do that for the reviews today, so that's pretty interesting. So again, that's a look at Lemmings. If you're into that kind of thing, Lemmings never did anything for me at all. So I would have seen this video and I probably would have read it, and when I went okay, and then I probably would have moved on. There's an ad here for Space Shuttle for the Super Nintendo with the reality check. I love the picture of the Space Shuttle hovering over the Earth there. I never played this either, so I have absolutely no opinion on it. I have no review of it or any recollection of it. I knew it existed. The only Space Shuttle game I've played, or Space Shuttle games that I've played, is I played for the Atari 2600 version, which was, I believe, from Activision, and also the Commodore 64 version. Moving right along. Now we get to some of my favorite things. You know that I am a big retro sports video game fan, so seeing a John Madden 92 review brings a smile to my face. We're talking about the Genesis version, of course. Here is the full spread. You can see the image of the ambulance on the field, which certainly garnered some raised eyebrows, and today the NFL would not let that be a thing. So we got away with a little bit more back in the early 90s for sure. So the reviews, we have Rick here, who gives it an 8 in concept, an 8.5 in graphics and animation, a 7.5 for sound, 8 for playability, and an 8 for entertainment value. So the overall rating was an 8. Andy gives it a 9 in concept, a 9 in graphics and animation, 8 in sound, a 9 in playability, and a 10 in entertainment value. And he says about entertainment value, Madden 92 is the best football game I've played to date. It doesn't get any better than this, except maybe in Madden 93. And we would certainly see about that in another year. So his rating was a 9. Marianne gave it a 7 in concept, an 8.5 in graphics, 8 in sound, 8 in playability, 8 in entertainment value for an overall rating of 8. For entertainment value, she says, well, it depends on how much football you can stand. If you're a Gridiron fan, play to your heart's content. EASN has another winner here. Of course, we are still talking about EASN, the Electronic Arts Sports Network, and not EA Sports yet. That would be in another year. As for me, NHL is still my favorite EA Sports cart for the Genesis. And you got to remember, this is coming from Minnesota, so hockey is a big thing up there. So that's not all that surprising. Then we take a look at the primary competition, which for that game would be Joe Montana 2. So here is the Joe Montana 2 spread. You can see Joe Montana's little poster there in the lower portion. You can see 1 or 2 screenshots of the game, which really doesn't tell you a lot. And we have our 3 reviews here. Rick the Video Ranger gave it an 8 in concept, a 7.5 in graphics and animation, an 8.5 in sound, a 6.5 in playability, and a 7.5 in entertainment value. For 8.5, he says, the digitized voice is as good as a gamer could hope for, but I found it a little tough to follow, as if the announcer was mixing up the different plays. Again, this is the first sports talk game, so you were going to run into a few problems, especially with the voice not being able to keep up with the on-screen action. That was a thing that happened in pretty much every sports talk game. Entertainment value says the play-by-play and the large characters make up for some of the deficiencies, making it a successful improvement over the original. Overall, Sports Talk Football is a very entertaining title. Ed the Video Wizard gives it an 8 in concept, a 9 in graphics, a 9 in sound, 9 in playability, and a 9 in entertainment value for an overall rating of an 8.5. Again, strong in the sound, saying that the announcer gives field position, yards to go, and score, not in little phrases, but in detailed play-by-play action. And in concept, he says, do you really need another football cart? Once you play Joe Montana 2, you may change your mind. Not a new concept for a game, but what an improvement on an old idea. And Andy McNamara gave it a 7 in concept, a 9 in graphics and animation, a 10 in sound, which I agree with, an 8 in playability, and an 8 in entertainment value. And he notes that the play-by-play is really done well. It's amazing how well the Genesis talks. The announcer sounds slightly computerized, but not too badly. The sound is the one thing that really stands out about this cart. And as I've mentioned in the past, sports talk is what sold me on a Genesis, not Sonic and not Madden or NHL or any sports game, because this was really when I was finding myself as a sports video game fan. But it was hearing that commentary in NFL Sports Talk Football 93 when I heard the play-by-play, and I'm like, what is that? And I found out that was coming from a Genesis game. That was when I knew that I had to own a Genesis, and it was awesome from there on, where I caught up with all the sports games, and I'm still a fan to this day. What else we have here? We have a look at CES, every gamer's ultimate dreams and desires. So we have a rundown of what Elizabeth saw at CES, or what was expected at CES. And it's important to remember, because E3 wasn't a thing, that kind of like how everyone wanted to go to E3 during the late 1990s and through the 2000s, getting to E3 was every gamer's dream, and it certainly was a dream of mine, and that I actually got to realize in 2011, 2012, and 2013. Going to CES was basically the equivalent of that in the early and middle 1990s. So there's a bunch of stuff mentioned here, from Super Battle Tank, the Gulf War, to a little bit here about Flying Edge, which was Acclaim's subsidiary that would publish games for the Genesis and the Game Gear. Let's see what else we have here. Wanderers from Ease for SNES. Now American Sammy has more good news for RPGers with Might and Magic out for NES in March, with the SNES version, Might and Magic 2, expected by June. So there's just a bunch of stuff here, and if I read all this video would be even longer. But it's really neat, and this was the thing that I would read from the beginning to the end so that I wouldn't miss a single thing about the games that were being talked about. This was how we found out, ladies and gentlemen. We did not have internet, and we did not have TV shows showing us what to expect. We didn't have Jeff Keighley showing us what was coming out every year. This is what we had, and we loved it. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I miss this era so much. Because there was so much to find out. There was so much to see. And there was suspense. You weren't getting things spoiled. It was definitely an exciting time. And I miss it very, very much. We have rumors from the video game world. Oh boy. These are interesting. So let's see. As you can see, the what's hot, very early 90s. So let's see what we have here. Rumor has it that there is a new Mario coming on the scene for you diehard 8-bit Nintendo fans. We've heard whisperings that Super Mario 4 for the original NES system will be out sometime in 1992. That was not a thing. No confirmation from Nintendo yet, but we'll keep our ears open. That was wrong. Nintendo of America used the stage of the January CES to announce its plans to release a CD-ROM for the Super Nintendo system by January of 1993. They plan to use the CD-ROM XA technology developed by Philips. The discs would work on this SNES CD only, but plans to use a bridge format, making them compatible with Philips CDI systems in the works. We all know what happened there. This was after the PlayStation idea had fallen through. We never got a CD for the Super Nintendo, and we did wind up getting some Nintendo licensed games in terms of the franchises. We got one Mario game, and we got 3 Zelda games, none of which were exemplary for the CDI. And Nintendo didn't work on any of them. They just said, you can use our characters, have at it. For those of you who are having trouble getting certain games to play on your new Genesis, many readers wrote in with a possible solution. They recommend putting in a cart that does work and removing it without shutting off the system. Then place the cart you're having difficulty with into the deck while it's still on. Due to the warning in the Genesis System Manual, Manuel, that states that this procedure may damage your system, we cannot recommend this as the best solution. And they put that in bold. So at least they're telling you, we're warning you that this may not work, but I'm sure some people tried anyway. I was not one of those people. So those are just some of the things that are mentioned in this column. More reviews. We have a review of Shatterhand for the NES, a game that I think is more popular now with retro gaming being popular than it was when the game was first released. And I think the review scores tell us a lot of that, is there's some division here. If we take a look at Ed's review, Ed gives concept a 7, graphics and animation an 8, sound a 7, playability an 8, and entertainment value an 8. So it's an overall rating of 7.5. Now that you finish RoboCop, what do? You try your hand at Shatterhand. Sorry, pun intended. Here is a shoot 'em up with a nice twist. I got a kick out of this game. You get to collect different icons to give you various abilities, collect enough of them, and score yourself some temporary invincibility. Make it to the end, and show the evil General Grover a smashing time. Whereas Marianne, the Game Master, gave it 10s down the board. This is the second game in this issue that she's been completely perfect on. I'm kind of more in Ed's camp. Rick gave an overall rating of 6. Another fighting to save the world concept with power-ups. The new angle here is a cybernetic hand. There's nothing here in sound that stands out. Easy to operate and very responsive to controls. Lots of power-ups. They gave it a 6. So a 6, a 7.5, and a 10. So you have kind of middle of the road and you have up top. And that's the benefit of having multiple reviewers, of course, is that you're getting 3 different outlooks or perspectives on the game. And the way that video game reviews worked during this period is you kind of got used to some reviewers. You found that their interests lined up with yours, where what they liked was kind of what you liked, so you tended to trust them a bit more than the others. And we found this to be true once we moved from the magazine era to the internet era, where someone like Jeff Gerstmann, for example, when he worked for GameSpot especially, he and I generally had the same taste in games, so I tended to pay more attention to his reviews than I would to IGN's or any other sites, for example. So that's kind of how it worked. So I would find, for example, with this, Ed's review kind of being in the middle of the road, not like an average game, but not a perfect game, kind of in the middle. I would generally tend to his review, at least that's my opinion. And I do think that Shatterhand has gotten better with age. I think that we have come to appreciate the game a bit more in the 2000s than we did when it came out in the 1990s. We have a review here of Faceball 2000 for the Game Boy, back when the Game Boy was a thing. I believe this came out for the Super Nintendo as well. I think it did. I'm pretty sure it did. And the reviews here are pretty similar. Rick gave it a 9 overall, Marianne gave it an 8.75, and Ed gave it a 9. And it is a very much, if you can see the screens, and I know it's kind of hard here, it is very much like a first-person perspective kind of game. And that was difficult to pull off, especially on a Game Boy. So the fact that they were able to pull it off and get that pseudo 3D effect going on was pretty cool, I thought. I wasn't a big fan of Faceball 2000, but I certainly respected what it did. Jewel Master, which I think is for the Genesis. Got a 6.5 from Ed, an 8.25 from Marianne, and a 6.5 from Rick. So just based on the reviews that I've read so far, it seems like Marianne is a bit more forgiving of a lot of games than Ed and Rick, who are 6.5. So I generally tend to, I probably would have waited on Jewel Master. And I think I might have played it a little bit, but I don't think I've spent too much time on it, and it's probably easy to see why. Now we talk a little bit about the Super NES, or the Super Nintendo. There it is right there. Oh boy. Getting a chance to work on a book of reviews for the Super Nintendo a few years ago was a dream come true for me. I have loved the Super Nintendo for a long time. It was the system that I got in late 1991 that I got. It's the first console that I bought with my own money. And I got it not too far before Christmas. It was between the launch date and Christmas. And I loved it. I was a big Nintendo fan already before that, having just gotten an NES less than a year prior. I really wanted to get on the ground floor with the Super Nintendo as soon as I could, and thankfully the job I was working in, where I was working at AT&T as a long-distance operator, afforded me that opportunity to spend some money and get the games for the console that I really wanted. Contrary to what you might think, and again, it was different in the 90s than it is now, but being a 20-something, especially an early, like a late teen, early 20-something, when you're working your first full-time job, you had more disposable income. You just did. Things weren't as expensive then, especially when you were living with roommates. I respect the fact that some people save their money. I probably should have in retrospect, but I didn't. The extra money that I had, I spent on video games because I really wanted to through all of my childhood and just couldn't do it because we were poor. So when I was working my first full-time job and I actually had money to spend, I certainly did spend it. So I got my Super Nintendo not too long after launch. I got the games that I wanted, including the very expensive Final Fantasy II, and I enjoyed those games. And Game Informer does a nice job here of kind of getting people on board with what the Super Nintendo is all about. It's a nice little 2-page spread that talks a little bit about the system and the games that are available for it. And they try and get technical. They talk about the Super Nintendo's 3.58 megahertz speed. They talk about RAM and ROM here. They talk about DRAM. So it kind of reads like what Nintendo Power used to do with some of their technical articles, which I think is pretty cool. But they just talk about specs. They don't really talk too much about games until like the last couple of paragraphs, which is a little strange. So if you're into tech stuff, this probably would have interested you, and I certainly would have read this myself back in late 91, early 92. But in terms of the games that are available for it, there's not really a lot here. And games are what drive the success of a console, not necessarily specs, as we would see with the Atari Jaguar sometime down the road. We have a review here for Radical Psycho Machine Racing, or RPM Racing, which gets a 6.25 from Marianne and from Andy, and a 5.75 from Ed. So there is the RPM spread. That is right there. You know, I've looked at this cartridge, and I've thought about getting it a couple of times when I've seen it at Gadget Depot, which was Video Game Depot for a time in Holyoke, Mass. I saw it a couple of times, and I really got close to pulling the trigger, and I just never did. And I think I might have made the right call, just because the reviews and everything that I read on the game has been very middling at best. Even though I generally tend to like these arcade-style racing games, it just doesn't seem like it would have enough to hold my interest. And if you're looking for a game that's like that, Andy compares it to a two-player version of RC Pro-Am. If I wanted a game like that, I would play Rock and Roll Racing for the Super Nintendo instead. Wonder Boy and Monster World, the Sega Genesis. The Sega continues this time on the... should be the Saga, but they kind of do a play on words. They call it the Sega Continues, this time on the Genesis. Rick gave it a 5.5. Ed gave it a 7.75. And Marianne gave it a 7.5. So there is a look at the game there. You know, the Monster World games... or the Wonder Boy games, I keep hearing good things about these, and I have bought them because I've heard good things about them from like GameSack and other places. And they haven't really hit me the same way that I thought they would hit me based on the glowing praise that I've heard for these games. And I kind of wish I saw the same thing that other people see. I do go back to them time and again just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. But to date, there's just been nothing there that's really made me say, wow, this is really a standout. Maybe it's just because I was still more a Super Nintendo guy or a Nintendo guy at this point, and I had missed a lot of these games, even when I was catching up with the Genesis later on. But for whatever reason, this game just really did nothing for me. So here, we take a look at what Funko Inc. was all about. And you can see the price list. This is for the Genesis over here, and it shows you how to use Funko here, use the Funko advertisements. Also listed there are the top 10 or the top 20 games for the Nintendo, the Game Boy, and the Genesis. So the top game for the Nintendo, the NES, was Super Mario 3, followed by Super Mario 2, Tecmo Bowl at 3, Super Mario Duck Hunt at 4, and Super Mario 2 at 5. So 4 of the top 5 games were Mario games. Zelda at 6, Double Dribble at 7, Punch-Out at 8, TMNT at 9, Dragon Warrior at 10, Blades of Steel at 11, Ice Hockey at 12, Excite Bike at 13, Metroid at 14, Zelda 2 at 15, Top Gun, which, by the way, I think deserves more credit, at 16, Ninja Gaiden at 17, deserves a higher ranking, Tetris at 18, Bases Loaded at 19, and Double Dragon 2 at 20. For the Game Boy, Tetris number 1, I can't argue with that. Super Mario Land at 2, TMNT Fall of the Foot Clan at 3, great game. Not great, but a fun game, I would say. Castlevania Adventure at 4, Motocross Mania at 5, Paperboy at 6, Dr. Mario at 7, Spider-Man at 8, Fist of the North Star at 9, Baseball at 10, Solar Striker at 11, NFL Football, really? Ooh. At 12, Final Fantasy Legend at 13, F1 Racer at 14, Alleyway at 15, Batman at 16, Fortress of Fear at 17, Golf at 18, DuckTales at 19, and Bases Loaded at number 20. So 2 lists, 2 spots for Bases Loaded. And for the Genesis, we have Sonic at 1, Super High Glide at 2. Super High Glide at 2. Super High Glide at 2. Ugh. Altered Beast at 3, Lakers vs. Celtics at 4, Tommy Lasorda Baseball at 5, Air Diver at 6, Golden Axe at 7, Pat Riley Basketball at 8, Buster Douglas Boxing at 9, Strider at 10, Sword of Vermilion at 11, Ghouls and Ghosts at 12, Joe Montana Football at 13, Mickey Mouse's Magic Castle at 14. Is that Castle of Illusion? I think it is. Revenge of Shinobi at 15, Madden at 16, Moonwalker at 17, Phantasy Star 2 at 18, Streets of Rage at 19, and Thunder Force 2 at 20. So you saw the Genesis list. Here are the Nintendo and Super Nintendo lists. Super Nintendo, of course, because it's new, has a much smaller section. And when you look at some Nintendo games, just for fun, where's Color or Dinosaur? It's not here yet. Let's see if there's some other games. Athletic games. Athletic World, 10 in trade, 19 used. Ninja Gaiden, let's see. Ninja Gaiden 2, 14 trade, $26 used. Ninja Gaiden 3, $26 in trade, $44 used. That's pretty close to where it's at now, although Ninja Gaiden 3 is actually a bit higher. So it's fun to look back at some of these. I wish I still had some of the newspapers with the price lists from Funko Land stores in the late 1990s, but this is what we worked with when doing mail order back in the day. And our Game Boy, Game Gear, and even some Neo Geo stuff down up at the bottom of the page there. We also have an ad for Mindscape arcade games for the Game Boy. Gauntlet 2, Paperboy 2, Clax, and Marble Madness. And yes, you could put your Game Boy in your pocket, but the original Game Boy really did stick out. It really wasn't as portable as you might think. It was really the Game Boy Pocket that was much more portable. And then, of course, the GBA SP, probably my favorite in terms of portability. You could just put that in your pocket and forget about it. Speaking of Game Boy, we have a review of Asteroids here for the Game Boy, where Andy gives it a 7 3/4, Rick gives it a 6, and Marianne gives it an 8.75. You can take a look at the screens here. It really doesn't look all that great. Certainly nothing like the arcade, but I think the general point is it's basically Asteroids on the go. Well, it isn't exactly like the arcade. It's playable and it's accessible, and that's really what you want. Remember, we really weren't getting a lot of true-to-life arcade ports on the Game Boy because it just really wasn't possible given the hardware. So we took what we got, and we were pretty much happy with it at that point. Galaxy Force 2, which I believe is for the Genesis. I did not play this for the Genesis. I've heard some good things about it, and I actually have it for the 3DS, and it looks great in 3D. But I really haven't played much of it myself. Marianne gives it a 6 3/4. Ed gives it a 6, and Andy gives it a 7. So that's pretty consistent. If you're looking for some fast action, finger-popping fun that's out of this world, save your quarters and seek out Galaxy Force 2 for the Genesis system. Let's see what else we have. Then we got a little word puzzle here where you get a word search. There you go. And also, if you wanted to send away and subscribe to Game Informer magazine, there's Toe Jam and Earl and Sonic there. Edutainment games, prime examples that learning can really be fun, where they're taking a look at Game Tech's Fisher-Price games and Sesame Street games, board games, puzzlers. I think it was important to have these edutainment games for the NES and for the Super Nintendo because video games back then, parents really wanted kids to go outside and thought they were kind of rotting their brains at that point. So having some kind of entertainment that was also educational, I think, was a pretty important thing. We would see this for other systems moving forward too, for the PlayStation and for the Nintendo 64. What is this? Art Alive Picasso is a cartridge for the Genesis. I don't know a lot about this, but there we go. The artwork looks pretty cool. Project Space Shuttle, do you have the right stuff? So this is the NES game that we saw an ad for earlier. Marianne gives it a 7 1/4. Ed gives it an 8.5, and Andy gives it a 6.75. So you can take a look at some of the screenshots here. Again, I have not played it, so I don't have my own opinion of the game. The screens look okay, especially for 8-bit, but I don't know a lot about the gameplay. So now we get some Fun Club tips. Bill Elliott's NASCAR Challenge. You go 200 miles an hour all the way around both oval tracks. Set up your car as follows. Manual transmission, engine set to race, spoiler at 23 degrees, gear ratio at 3.23, tire stagger at 3 inches. You should be able to go 200 miles an hour even on the turns. There are tips here for Dragon Warrior 2, Air Diver, Strider for the Genesis, Spy Hunter, Twin Cobra, Final Fight SNES, Bases Loaded, Super Mario World, Zelda 2, Super Mario 3, Lakers vs. Celtics, and Kid Icarus. They were very short, and they were all reader submitted, which was kind of cool. This felt a little kid-ish, I guess. It feels more like the Burger King Fun Club, if you remember that. But that's okay. As video games back then, if we're being completely honest, were still very much youth-dominated. More tips here for Side Pocket, Bart versus the Space Mutants, Double Dragon 3, Bimmy and Jimmy Say Hi, Hunt for Red October, Adventure Island 2, Final Fantasy, John Madden 92 for the Genesis, Arnold Palmer, Tournament Golf, Sonic, Gradius, and Gyarados. We review a Missile Command here too as well. Missile Command I think looks a little bit better than Asteroids does. It's a little more detailed, although it's still different from the arcade. If we take a look at the reviews, Andy gave it an 8, Ed gave it an 8, and Marianne gave it a 7.5. And I think that's pretty much where I would put these games. It's close to the arcade, but not quite the same thing. And again, that was good enough for us back then. So here's the Tech Talk section. We're almost to the end of the magazine. We're taking a look at, I believe, now that I got to look myself here, talking about the Game Genie, the ASCII pad for the Super Nintendo. You're taking a look at Monkey Island 2, the Power Clutch stick for the Genesis, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, which is for PC. The Game Genie, by the way, is for the Genesis here. Oh, and here's something interesting, and I had wondered this myself. Those of you who recently bought new Genesis decks may be experiencing a little technical difficulty. If you're a fan of early EA classics, you probably discovered that Populous, Zany Golf, and Budokan won't work on Genesis decks that come with Sonic the Hedgehog enclosed. This is due to minor improvements that Sega has made on their system. These improvements alter the way the hardware reads the cart. If you're experiencing this problem, EA suggests you call their customer warranty number. So that's pretty interesting right there. Review here of Winter Challenge for the Genesis. I have not played that, even as a sports gaming fan. The Olympic games and the Genesis never really appealed to me all that much. Andy gave it a 6, Rick gave it a 7, and Ed gave it an 8.5. Maybe I do need to go back and look at this. I don't know. Some of it looks interesting. And Turrican for the Game Boy gets a 5 from Rick, an 8 from Marianne, and a 7.75 from Ed, so maybe Rick is being a little hard on it. You know, I have never played a Turrican game. I'm not even kidding. I don't think that the Game Boy would be the way to find out about the series myself, but nevertheless, it's kind of cool to see that there is a portable version of the game that you can play. And then we have more Game Informer letters to the editor. And I love these. I want to close with a couple of these. First of all, I would like to have more pages in your magazine. I think you should have more tips, and I would like to see more sports games like RBI Baseball, Super Tecmo Bowl, tennis, volleyball, track and field 1 and 2, and so on. I hope that for the January issue of the magazine, you'll put the team that wins the Super Bowl on the cover. I am all for more sports video games being covered. I've talked about this before. Sports games get a bad rap from self-titled hardcore gamers. Don't think that sports games should count for a hill of beans. And I am here to tell you that sports games count for a lot more than that. A lot of average people who play video games buy sports games and enjoy them. They are a large part of the video game sales market and have been for a very long time. It is okay not to like them. I completely understand that. But to write them off as irrelevant makes no sense. And no, they are not the same game every year, even though it looks that way. Sometimes you have to look closer at what improvements are made, but there are often improvements that are made, unless, of course, we're talking about EA FIFA games for the Switch, in which case that's not really a thing. Interesting. Someone told me about your magazine the other day. I have looked everywhere for it and just can't seem to find it anywhere. Could you please send me some information on where to get it and how to subscribe? Thank you for all your help. It is greatly appreciated. Game Informer is not on the newsstand at this time. You may either purchase a copy or subscription by writing or calling Funko, or at any of their Funko Land retail locations, which are currently located in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So this was before the expansion. So interesting that they didn't sell these on newsstands for quite some time. There's a wrap here. Yo, 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 sign me up. Your prices aren't great. Sitting at home, I just can't wait. From Game Boy to NES, these are the things we want to test. Super NES. If you want a dime, please send it on time because the Fun Club can make you feel like you're on Cloud9, Word Up Power. That comes from Rhode Island. I probably did that terribly, but that's okay. I am writing to ask why you do not include the TurboGrafx 16 in your publication. I personally own a TurboGrafx 16 system, as well as a Game Boy, SNES, and NES. I realize the Genesis and Nintendo systems have more titles available, but that can't be a good reason to leave out this great system. The games I have played on my TurboGrafx 16 were not only visually appealing, but sound great and play hard. I would like to mention that the TurboGrafx 16 is the only system right now that has CD-ROM games available for use with a CD-ROM system in the USA. Titles available are educational, exciting, and have been on the market for at least a year. Please let me know why you have failed to include them in your publication, because I am angry. I feel that you are missing a large part of the video game population out there. Sincerely, a proud but somewhat disgruntled TurboGrafx 16 owner. And there are several letters like this. And the response is very simple. We do not mean to slight TurboGrafx and Lynx owners out there. Someone complains about the Lynx not being covered. As a new publication, we still have a limited number of pages and staff. We felt it better to focus on a few systems. Both are good systems with loyal followings. We hope to introduce coverage of Lynx and TurboGrafx 16 in Tech Talk and what's hot in the future. Yeah, it's 1992. If we're being completely fair, and I'm just about done here. If we're being completely fair, the TurboGrafx 16 in 1992 was starting to do this. And if we're being fair, the Lynx was never huge. We're not questioning the fact that the consoles were good or great or bad or whatever. I think the TurboGrafx 16 is one of the most underrated systems of all time. But I understand why it's not being covered in a magazine like this. And the explanation they give is very accurate. If you only have 3 or 4 reviewers on staff and you're trying to cover so many different platforms, it is very difficult to do, especially when you're fledgling like Game Informer was at the time. With the TurboGrafx 16, at that particular point in its history, it was already on the downslope. It was struggling. NEC knew it. They were cutting the price on the console, even though the CD-ROM was available. And I completely get it, that it wasn't covered. I will love the TurboGrafx 16 until the day I die, but if I'm being completely straight and honest, I understand why they did what they did here. It makes perfect sense to me. Have a couple of other advertisements to show you before we wrap up this episode of Print from the Past, including this super R-Type advertisement from IRM. I really wish I was better at R-Type, and I think a lot of people feel the same way. The games are very difficult, and not that that is a bad thing, but for shooters, I think I'm just going to take my life force and run. Also have some ads for Simpsons games. It's Bartmania for your NES and your Game Boy. Of course, that would be extended to 16-bit systems like the Super Nintendo and the Genesis with Virtual Bart and Bart's Nightmare. And last but not least, we have an ad for Shatterhand, which we talked about earlier. And we have some games from Tengen, including Paperboy, RBI 3, and Pit Fighter for your Genesis. And that is a look at Game Informer magazine from early 1992, their first issue of that year. I was not reading Game Informer to that point. I didn't even really know what Funko was other than a mail order company at that time. It wasn't until I started working for Funko Land in 1998 that I started to read Game Informer pretty regularly. If I'm thinking way back and trying to remember about the magazines that I was buying from Barnes & Noble and Walden Books back in the early and mid 1990s, maybe I saw issues of Game Informer toward the middle part of that decade, but I never really bought it. My magazines were pretty strictly the usual suspects. Your EGMs, your Game Pros, Game Players Magazine, Video Games, Computer Entertainment, Game Fan, the really top ones, EGM2. But Game Informer I really didn't get into until 98. But when I did, it was a magazine that I did continue to read from that point on because it added another bullet to my arsenal of video game information, and that information was super important at the time. So, hope you enjoyed this episode of Print from the Past as much as I enjoyed looking back into history in early 92. We'll do another issue soon, but until then, please take care of yourselves and each other. See you later.